What are the implications, if any, for the international community? I think, certainly the community in one way or another supports the notion of a two-state solution. But as you're pointing out, that's only part of the issue. And dealing internally is a lot more difficult, I think, for the international community. Do you see, are there implications? And if so, what are they?
Well, I think the major implication is that the international community can no longer ignore this issue as it has done. The international community in the United States have, for a long time, basically regarded the Palestinian problem as solely concerning to a large extent Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, to a lesser extent Palestinian refugees. There's this other whole part of the Palestinian population which have been completely ignored. And so the major message is that that there are also Palestinians inside Israel, that you need to address this. This is not just an internal domestic matter. To the extent to which the international community has recognized this, the European Union, I think, has been more active in this. They have seen it as something of really just a domestic issue within Israel. The main message is, if you want to solve the Palestinian problem, if you want to ultimately have stable and sustainable peace between Jews and Palestinians in the Middle East, then you have to tackle this aspect of the problem as well as the occupation. You can't just focus on one part of the problem, just believe that the establishment of a Palestinian state will by itself resolve this conflict. And in fact, ignoring this other part of the problem will ultimately undermine any kind of peace agreement. The Palestinian minority, I want to say as well, is actually increasingly pursuing, going toward the international community. Increasingly in recent years, as even the legal avenues that Ilan mentioned have been exhausted. They're not really placing as much hope as they once did on the Supreme Court. Increasingly, the strategy of Arab NGOs is to go and try to internationalize this issue, to go to the UN, the EU. So the international community is going to become involved as a result of this strategy now on the part of Palestinian NGOs within Israel. And I think it should become involved because the international community has identified the resolution of this conflict, of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as a major issue. And if you want to resolve this conflict, you have to address this part of the problem.
So basically our book has to be read, I think, as a challenge to the whole community. Notice that, for example, even when President Obama spoke about it, this particular issue never came up. And the other thing I want you to notice, because, we read the fine print, this is our profession, when Netanyahu talks about the recognition of Israel, he talks about recognition of Israel as a Jewish state. Netanyahu himself never says you have to recognize Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, which is the formal thing that people are using. And, people like us are specializing in reading the fine print and say where is the balance that need to occur.
Questions in the back? There's a lady here.
You paint the picture of the Palestinians in Israel as being extremely dire, but the Harvard Kennedy Law School in 2007 did a survey, and 67% of those Arabs said that they'd rather live in Israel than any other country in the world. So how can their living conditions be so dire then? I think it's more of an issue of a demographic difference in economy and society that can be changed just like in any other society. And I think that if you focus just on the Israelis, that it's their responsibility to do that, then that's not going to go anywhere, because if you look at what the Arabs are teaching their children, it's a lot worse than what the Jews are teaching their children in terms of the other. Because if you go to the West Bank, if that becomes a Palestinian territory, it's going to have to be Judenrein, because they won't accept Jews in their country. Whereas Israel has, I think, quite well in the circumstances, but it can always do better, and I think it should strive to do better. It has granted freedom for all its citizens under law, and it might not be practiced as well as it could, but it's legally there.
Well, in terms of the Palestinian desire to remain in Israel and to live in Israel, I think first and foremost that should be understood not as an indication of their love for their living in Israel, but for the fact that that is their homeland, and a very core element of the Palestinian identity and narrative is to remain in their homeland. This is a community, bear in mind, who remained in Israel after the War of 1948, who have persisted and stayed in the country. So I think, first and foremost, like most people, I obviously left my homeland, as you might be able to tell, but most people want to stay in their homeland. Most people want to remain where they were born and where their family live. And so I think the main reason why they don't want to leave Israel is simply because of that. It's the same reason why they don't want to move to a Palestinian state. I don't think it's necessarily because they think Israel is such a wonderful country or has treated them so well. But I do agree with you that the fact is that certainly compared to their counterparts in the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem, and in the wider Arab world, the Palestinian community have experienced considerable improvements in their lives. And that is important to recognize. Their standard of living has improved, and that is thanks to their living in Israel. They have been afforded political freedoms, the freedom to vote, the freedom to be elected, that they would not enjoy in any Arab country, and they would not enjoy in the Palestinian Authority today. So I don't want to present a completely bleak picture of Palestinian life in Israel. I think there are some benefits. In fact, it's precisely because, for instance, of increasing education and access in particular to higher education that has resulted in the political mobilization of the Palestinian community and has resulted in becoming increasingly assertive in terms of their political rights. So this is one of the paradoxes. It's precisely because of those benefits that they are now so frustrated by the continued gap that does exist between them and the Jewish majority.
So first of all, I would like to say to Dov that he did not leave his country. He just moved to one of the colonies. Welcome. But more seriously, I think the point that Dov made is something I want to emphasize because I think it's important sociologically. Namely, that the Arab community in Israel has evolved now into a very sophisticated, educated, and therefore much more assertive community than the community that has been there during the 50s and 60s and 70s. I grew up in Israel in the 1950s, okay, between two villages that have become now towns, between Baqa el-Garbiya and Baqa el-Sha'riya, okay, the eastern and the western Baqas. Those places were very third world, very underdeveloped, and so on and so forth. You have today Palestinians who are highly educated. They studied all over the world, including the United States. They brought many of the values, the legal values. For example, the head of Adalah, Yusuf Jabarin, studied here in Washington, D.C. The method that he is using, going to the Supreme Court and challenging the government against discriminations, are basically the methods that were used by blacks in America to challenge the American discriminatory system that has been in existence for 400 years. So basically, there is a wonderful book written by Danny Rabinovich and Hawla Abu Bakr, a Jewish man and an Arab woman, and it is talking about this sociological change that has brought forward a very sophisticated, assertive, capable Arab community that cannot simply be sort of poo-pooed by the regime, that they are challenging on legal grounds within the system, and this is positive. Okay, not against the system, but they are working within the system in order to try to make sure that the system gives them what they believe is their due.